Hello, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me. I'm really excited to be a part of Agile Swarming. And this was something that came up on my radar as I was reading up about a lot of amazing Agile communities that are around the world. And I thought I want to be a part of this. So I'm really excited to be here. And in particular, I want to talk about something that is, in my experience, I found something we don't often talk about, which is failures. So we're going to go deep and dive into the topic of failures a little bit more. And it's in the previous talks, we've seen a little bit of people touching on it, but I want to really go into that uncomfortable zone and talk a bit and explore a bit more about that. So before I start, just to tell you who I am. Uh, this is a really nicely taken picture of me, and I'll tell you why I put it up there. It's not just my wall. I'm Seemin. I'm a VP of engineering at a company called Prima. It's an insurtech startup that took the Italian car insurance market by storm about 8 years ago. And if I don't know how many of you know about the insurtech market in Italy, but it's a very conventional market. And Prima was this like new kid on the block. And we were doing insurance like insurance was never done before. And lo and behold, 8 years on, 1,000 people strong, we are the largest car insurance company in Italy. And now expanding over into other European markets. So who knows, Poland might be one of the markets we explore eventually. I'm also a non-executive director and co-founder of Zeus Foundation. I'm originally from Pakistan, that's where I grew up. And Zeus Foundation is a charity that I run, I founded, which works to provide free education to children in remote areas of Pakistan. Something I'm incredibly proud of. We've been running for 12 years and have educated over 6,000 children who would have no chance of getting an education. So that's one part of my life. Another thing is I'm also a co-founder and director of Women in Tech Dorset. Dorset is a county in the UK where I live, and most of my career has been there. And one of the things I noticed is that when I started my career there, I was the only software engineer. I mean, there are not many engineers who are female anyway, overall, but in Dorset in particular, I was literally the only one on the floor. Of a room full of men. Needless to say, they were great with me, but this was something I wanted to do something about. So recently, about a year and a half ago, I formed this community alongside another lady who is helping organize us, and there are a lot of training and development opportunities for women in Dorset, and also just kind of putting our arms around the community so they feel supported in the industry as well. At the same time, I don't, this is a very good picture that a professional photographer took of me, but normally I don't look like that because I'm a mom of two, and I work from home predominantly. So my hair is all over the place, and there's usually a child in the background running around, and I'm trying to cope with that in a full-time job as well. Those two kids are, um, are a huge inspiration to today's talk. Because in leadership, I find that we often don't talk about failures. In parenting, when I became a parent for the first time, I took that approach of an engineer towards parenting. So, for example, if my son wouldn't sleep, I thought I must read all the books on sleep. Because this problem has to be broken down, there has to be a solution out there. I gathered data on his sleep patterns every single night for 3 months in order to identify if I could reliably predict a pattern, and I couldn't. In the end, I had to give up, and I had completely failed in realizing that parenting is more about the journey and not about breaking down the problem. And the millions and millions of books on parenting, one thing is indicative: nobody has cracked it. We have to do it all on ourselves at our own, in our own time. So this is kind of like a little bit of why I'm doing this. But I want to start with you a little bit. I want to understand, when I say failure, what comes to your mind? Tell me a word, an emotion. Just shout out. What comes to your mind when I say failure? Disappointment. Journey. Did somebody say journey or learning? Learning. What else? Fear. Hold on to that one. Like shame. I love that one. Yes. So, there's a human experience, really human experience that is linked to the word failure. It's not. It's not something. Oh, I experience failure so much different than the other person. We all experience failure pretty much in a very similar way. I want to kind of hone in and go back to sort of how we are defining failure for the purpose of this presentation. And I would go back to Amy Edmondson's book, The Right Kind of Wrong, and I would recommend everybody to read it if you haven't. It's a great book on failure. And she defines it as an outcome that deviates from the desired results. Okay, so for the purpose of this, this is the definition that we're going to work with. But think about it. Whenever an outcome deviates from the desired results, does it make us go, whoa, awesome? It doesn't. Generally, it creates a lot of fear, shame, a lot of, that cringy feeling, and you think, oh, do I need to deal with this? And that's the reason why we're diving in. A little bit of self-reflection on that as well. I want you to meet someone. His name is Bob. He is a guy you've met just now. He's a great guy. You just come across him at this amazing conference. He's introduced himself and he just told you that he knows that he's failing at key areas of his job. Now, if that's the information you have about Bob, what does it make you think about him? If you're an employer, do you go in and say, yep, must hire Bob? I guess what you're thinking. But what is it about? What is it about failures that gives us that feeling? And I think the thing that I want us to come back to and learn from is exactly the self-awareness around failure, so that we have a way of dealing with it, a way of learning from it. And what I have done is I am going to share 3 anecdotes of my own failures with you. And hopefully in that way, I'll share some of the ways that I found I could manage or deal with the failures better, in the hope that in this exploration, you will find perhaps something that might be useful for you one day as well. So the first anecdote I want to tell you is about the graduate in distress. And as I told you in my story, I'm originally from Pakistan, and I came to the UK when I was 24 years old to do my master's degree. I had already done a computer science degree. I thought I was ace. I did a really good grade, and I thought now is the time to go to the West, a country I'd never known. Nobody knew me in that country. I was pretty much on my own. It was a big leap of faith from my part and my parents' part. I don't know whether any of you are aware of the Asian parents, but they are super controlling. And to let their 24-year-old daughter just say, yeah, fly away, you bird, that doesn't happen. So there was a lot of laborious convincing I had to do over years in order to get them to the point where they're like, okay, go do 1-year degree and come right back, right? So anyway, 15 years on, I'm still living in the UK. But the thing is that when I started that, I started my master's degree in the UK. That was a time, it was just so important for me that I succeed, not only for myself, but for my parents, for everybody, for my friends who had put so much faith in me. I was this person who was going and going to do something. And so I remember landing my first job. I was a graduate software engineer for an aerospace company, super cool and everything. But the pressure of it, the idea that I could not make mistakes. And I want you to get into the headspace of that graduate who knows that they have to prove something, so they are feeling the pressure, but at the same time, they don't really have any kind of sort of examples around them or anything like that. But the behaviors I was showing was that if, for example, there was difficult piece of work that was assigned to me, instead of saying, I can't do this, I think it's a bit too much, or I need to go in and learn about it, I failed at communicating the fact that needed time to learn. So I would just say, okay, I'll do it. And then what it meant was I had to work extra hours just to make up for that time because I was so afraid to admit to the fact that I needed that learning time, that I was failing to do some of the bits of my role. And at the key of it, as somebody shouted, was fear. Now, it's not just fear we feel. Whenever we think we are failing, and this is again going into the literature from clinical psychology, what we feel is a fear of rejection. So how we have evolved is within communities, and we thrive when we are a part of a community. And what happens is when we feel that we will be ostracized, we will be separated out from a community, there is an innate fear that arises. And what we tend to do in that scenario is we pretend to say things we do not know. And people who are aware of something called the imposter syndrome, they tend to suffer from this a lot. You might be sitting in a meeting room where you think, I don't really know this subject, but you just say, oh, yes, I have an opinion, or you pretend. And I think in leadership, this is a big trap where we pretend to know things that we actually don't know. And we are afraid to say that, I don't know. And I think some of the learnings I took out of that is that our interpretation of events actually affects the reaction towards them. So, for example, I remember going into the office, and there were two ladies who had been in that place for many years, and they were chatting away. And as I walked in, they laughed, and I thought, must be laughing at me. I don't belong in this place. And I think that my interpretation of two women laughing was actually me being victimized there for some reason, me being separated out. But when I looked into this, I figured out that actually what they were doing was they were colleagues for 15 years. Their kids went to school together. And one of them was now getting engaged. So they were just having a laugh about his engagement or whatever. And I was not even in that conversation remotely. And this conversation was not even linked to me. So the fact that I thought they were talking about me or separating me out was just completely misplaced. So the thing that we need to do in a situation where we feel that we have that first reaction towards failure. So the first reaction generally towards failure would be that we will have suddenly this fear. And if we are feeling that we are super afraid of something, the thing to note is whether we have all of the information and reasoning behind it. And it's easier said than done, because it's really easy to fall into the trap of our first emotional reaction of feeling shame, feeling guilt, feeling fear. And in order to deal with that, take a step back. It might be something, an error you have done in the work you were doing. It might be that you made the wrong call. It might be that there was some mistake. And as soon as you find out, you're afraid. Am I going to be found out? Are they going to think, I don't know how to do my job? And suddenly, as you are thinking those things, reflect back. It's not that you don't know how to do your job, your information, your history of achievement. It might be your education, it might be the reviews, it might be your colleagues, it might be many other things, the data and information around that you are ignoring in that moment for your first initial reaction. So the learning for me was to step away from the first initial reaction and figure out what was the data, and I did not have enough information to form that immediate response. And it helps. It really, really helped me. A question for leaders: the environments that you work in or you produce, do you think that they are psychologically safe? Shout out the answers.
Well, we can see. We're not speaking about it. No,
Yeah.
your answer.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things, again, in leadership is the topic of psychological safety, and we'll come back to it again. But this is something to keep in mind as we are responsible for looking after the environment that is around us, and the teams can thrive. Psychological safety is when you don't feel that you will be punished for admitting your mistakes, or for giving feedback, or for voicing your opinions, if that's the environment you're in, you're more likely to form those learnings and actually thrive with those learnings. The next stage. So the next stage I want to take you on is further down in my career, which is the imperfect perfectionist. And anybody who has dealt with software engineers know that we have the problem of analysis paralysis. We go into analyzing and super analyzing things, and we are looking at, and it's just never enough, and you just carry on doing it that. But the reason why we do this is because inherently we want to get to this ideal state. There is a perception of a place we want to get to. And in doing that, we feel that unless we get to that state, we are failing in everything that we are doing. So our goal is this eyes, there's a fixation, an obsessive need. And some of the behaviors that I was showing that you might show in that in that phase is obsessive need to make everyone happy. I want to make everyone happy with this decision. So one of the things I would do as a leader is, if I took a decision, I would go literally spend hours, 1 hour with every team member, making sure they were absolutely happy. And if I found even a single team member who was unhappy, I would think, oh, that was a complete failure, because I just would not accept anything but the absolute happiness of everyone, which everybody knows is pretty impossible to achieve. And that resulted in complete burnout. I was doing over and beyond, going over and over. And I think that what I wasn't realizing, that failure as I defined it, not getting the absolute perfection as I introduced, was failing to actually acknowledge the progress that I had made. So the learnings from that journey is, I learned something called positive attribution, which is very, very important. So I'll tell you an anecdote. Research tells us that, in Olympics, the gold medalist and the bronze medalist are the happiest. And the most miserable are the silver medalist. Any guesses on why that happens? They almost made it, that's it. So the gold medalist obviously is very happy because they won it. And the bronze medalist is like, well, the other option was I won nothing. So I won something, that's great. But silver medalists, like, I almost had it. They're the most miserable ones. They're like, I almost had my hands on gold. It's not gold. However, what they haven't done is the fact that they nearly did it. And I think that's the positive attribution. We need to turn things around, and it's very difficult because, again, you go back to evolutionary biology. What it does is we are wired to look at threats, right? We want to protect ourselves. So we're like, okay, what's the negative? What is going to harm me next? So we are wired to look at negatives a lot more than positives. If somebody says a bad thing about you and 100 good things, you will remember the bad thing. You will obsess over it. And this is common. But positive attribution is possible. We can train ourselves to look at the positive, to look at the 100 positive things rather than the one negative thing. And there are things that help. And I don't know whether you guys are aware, but Adam Grant is a very famous author. He's written a number of books, and he focuses a lot on excellence instead of perfection. So I think that's a very important point to remember, that small steps that take you towards a particular goal are much more important than the impossible ideal you have set in your mind. And I also feel that understanding the type of failure is very important at this stage. You need to also understand what failures, and I know you're going to touch on it a little bit, but I want to explore it a bit more in the sense of what are the different types of failures that you might encounter. And the first type of failure are smart failures. And this is taken from Amy Edmondson's research again, so I'm a big fan of hers. And what she calls smart failures are the ones that you could not have found out the results you could not have found out unless you failed. So, for example, a lot of our scientific experiments come into this category because in scientific experiments, you might be exploring a new territory. You don't know where you're going to go, so you've got to change that. And 70% of scientific experiments fail, but they move us all forward. So these are the smart kind of failures. So I want to know from the audience if you've got an example in your world of smart failures that you have experienced. Anybody who works in innovation?
Buying exotic cryptocurrency, losing everything, and then sticking to it.
Yeah, finding out which one was better. Yes, I think in software world, for example, let's say we want to figure out whether this new product is really fit for purpose. We run POC, proof of concepts, all the time. That is a type of a smart failure because a lot of the times the POCs don't pass. You just think, oh, that product wasn't really for us. But there is no way to find out unless you try. So you run an experiment to learn. And those kind of failures are smart failures. There are other failures also. They're called basic failures. So basic failures are mistakes. For example, you've written some code, and in my world, in software world, that's not very uncommon that you didn't test it quite right. So basically, it went into the production and failed, which means that the nature of the failure is avoidable. So you can learn from it, and you can improve it. And it was done because there were some areas that was missing. There were some basic things there that you could have changed, and you learn from it quickly. As long as they're not maliciously done. So basic failures can also happen when people are trying to cause these failures themselves. Or if we are not learning from the failure, then they can happen over and over. They only become a problem if the basic failures are repeated. So if you learned that the system was not tested and you deployed it and it hacked the whole thing, then you know, okay, this area needs better testing. But if you do the same thing again, that means that you didn't quite learn from the initial failures. So basic failures are important, but the most common ones in the current world are complex failures. Complex failures are caused by a very complex world we live in, because our world right now is ever changing. We have a lot of things that are linked to one thing or another. So a lot of the times, one failure is not actually a failure in one place. It is several small things. And understanding that is a very important part of coming back to the learnings that we have and trying to understand how we understand them. How do we not think about our perceived idea of perfection, and what happens when we don't achieve it? Because in the world of complexity, if we do not think that, it's a tiny little thing I wasn't able to achieve, but really it's a part of a complex world and many things are interlinked, then it's really, really easy to understand that you wouldn't be in control of everything. So you wouldn't try to control. So for me, the biggest learning was not to try to control a very complex environment, but actually letting go and learning from that failure. And now I want you to meet Bob again. You remember he said that he's failing at key areas of his job? What if I told you that he's actually a heart surgeon? And he failed, and his job is to save people's lives. And he failed in his job because during heart surgery of a couple of his patients, they passed away. He couldn't save them. However, in that process, he was able to contribute towards open heart surgery, which would save eventually millions of people's lives. Because that's how the open heart surgery actually came to be. So it was a series of a lot of not experiments, but failures, because people were trying to desperately save the lives of these people. They failed. However, in their failings, they learned. And based on their learning, we now have open heart surgery, which saves millions of lives every year. So you don't hate Bob that much anymore because of that reason. And in the end, I want to bring you to not too far in the past, which is high performer. And if anybody knows anything about me, they know that high performance teams is something, a passion of mine, and I talk a lot about it, and it's something that I think a lot about. And this is something where I want to bring you back to thinking about performance and performance of a team and how it impacts the culture. I remember being head of engineering for a company, building these teams with laser focused on results. I wanted to get all the results that I could, and I wanted to go from one place to the other. So any deviation in the outcomes was unacceptable. And it was, high performance was the biggest goal there. What I was failing to recognize is that it was low psychological safety in the environment. And this is not uncommon. A lot of high performance teams have got low psychological safety. And in the end, no true high performance can actually be achieved if you have low psychological safety. And there's this Netflix book, No Rules Rules. Has anybody read it? Show of hands. You read it? Oh, a couple of people. Good. And in that, they focus a lot on candor. That is something that is so important. But it's easy to say, oh yeah, just tell us the truth. But imagine telling the truth to people who are going to penalize you for it. You are never going to do that. And in the world where there are several complex failures, normally the failure appears in small indications. So you will see your team or somebody around the periphery saying, I think there is a blip in something. And if you don't pick up on those, then you have a massive complex failure. So some of the learnings from that was, for me, is to understand the relationship between performance and psychological safety. What I figured out that as my teams felt safer to express how they were, express the feedback in a very open way, in how they expressed themselves, as well as they gave us the feedback to improve, and they admitted to their own mistakes as well as highlighting our mistakes, it improved our performance immensely. It was just a direct relation. It was just absolutely amazing to see. And high performance has then intrinsic link to trust and belonging. The more we trusted them to give us their information, the more they belong to the team, the better they perform. So there's a direct link to that. There's a lot of research that has gone into the art of belonging as well. So Owen Eastwood's book on belonging, I'll recommend also to read on the same subject. Question for the leaders. How do you create high performance in your organizations? Motivation. Good. Delegation. Excellent. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, fear again, instilling fear. No, I think these are some apart from that, these are some interesting ideas, because we are all trying to achieve something, and I believe that in that we are moving towards perhaps blindly pursuing some of the things that might not be as meaningful. We are trapped by the first feeling we got, because it's all the need for speed. Just do it faster. Can't you just deliver it more? Can't you just do it yesterday? And so we don't have the time to actually reflect, stand back and figure out what is actually happening. So any leader who's in the room, if there is the key lesson that that I have learned from my experience that I would like you to take away, is to step back and figure out whether you've got all the information, whether you've analyzed the failure, whether you've analyzed all the factors around it, and then Are you rising above your first emotional gut reaction to failure, which is common in non-human beings, and approaching it in a way that we can derive learning from? And again, appreciating that not all failure is great. We have to avoid certain type of failures too. So to analyzing and appreciating that is a huge gain. And like Louisa May Alcott, who is a classic literature writer, said, "I'm not afraid of the storms, for I'm learning to sail my ship." So don't be afraid of the journey. Don't be afraid of those mistakes, even though our initial reactions might take the better of us, but we can change that for ourselves. So in the end, what I would like to say is I hope that this little exploration left you a little bit less afraid of failure. Thank you very much.